All right, so we're here for part 5 through 8 of Tyranid Delivery Experts. But at first, the first part of the stream is going to be a pretty much ask me anything about the premiere I just did for Mistakes of the Emperor 6. That was a very yeah, that was a project I did not know when I was ever going to get done. And it was only after a lot of time had passed um, that the things that would, make it able to be finished were handled. um, the next episode is going to be primarily concerning, for Mistakes of the Emperor, concerning Lehman Russ and the Emperor, how he handled diplomacy. The the So if you want to go on a rant, go for it, bud. Um, I think that talking about Lehman while discussing the Emperor's diplomacy is a very fitting subject. Um, hey, friendly wallflower, how's it going, bud? The webway was Sothis says the webway was always a potential problem. Without Wraithbone or equivalent material, the Golden Throne required an extremely powerful cycler to work, and an equivalent would have been required. Yes. Um, the whole thing about Sotha is completely right. Um, Sotha is absolutely right about that. The Golden Throne required an absolute. Um, it just required all this extra effort to make work versus Wraithbone and other psychotropic materials. Not psychotropic, psychoreactive. Um, the Emperor was using Mechanicus Construct alongside his own mental ability, boosted by the Golden Throne, to actually make it work. And Magnus would have been able to do it. What's going on, Declonius? But the problem was, as I've gone into, there was a lot of things that the Emperor did wrong, and one of them was he just failed to empathize with any of his children. Um, well, the thing about it is, Sotha, it's not clear if the Emperor ever really realized or knew about the Necron Tomb Worlds. Um, I don't for sure know if he would have or if he wouldn't have. Um, I haven't seen anything in the books to show that he knew about the Necrons in any way, shape, or form. But yes, Mr. Wright, they definitely could have used Blackstone in the construction of the uh, the Webway project. They could have done it. Hey, Dark, how's it going, bud? I told you just wait a little bit because I had something in store for that. But the next episode is going to be mainly dealing with diplomacy and with the Emperor's real inability. For as much as people said the Primarchs were excellent diplomats and statesmen, they weren't. The Emperor was not an excellent diplomat and statesman. It was just awful, as a matter of fact. In fact, caused more problems than they actually solved. But I'll go into that with Mistakes of the Emperor 7. Um, Brandon Smith said he lived through the Dark Age. He should have known of neurons considering what they were capable of. This is true. The Emperor helped fix Dorne's Blackstone Fortress. He did that. Is the Phalanx a Blackstone Fortress? I don't think so. Um, Reich says, you do the Emperor's work, Hobbit. Mint Klondike bar, what flavor do I like? Pretty much, I like the originals because I'm boring like that. As far as like that goes, there's a lot of things I wouldn't do for a Klondike bar. Ronnie says the Emperor was kind of like the stubborn old man who says, "I know better because I'm old, and you youngins can't tell me squat until his sons leave him in a retirement home or chair." Painfully accurate. Painfully accurate. Um, It's a dark. Yeah, Mr. Reich is correct. The Blackstone Fortress is not. Oh, well, no, sorry. The Phalanx is not a Blackstone Fortress. The Phalanx was built du- during the Dark Age technology by the same people who eventually, um, were played host to Rogel Dorn, that had their own little pocket empire. So it's a relic from Terra's Dark Age of technology, when the Eldar were busy screwing up everything. Um, I the I actually, when I started working on six, I had planned to release it within 3 weeks of releasing Mistakes of the Emperor 5. And what wound up, there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happened, um, that pushed it out as far as it did. In fact, the day I found it actually very, very poetic that the day I hit render to, put together the video and get it ready to upload to YouTube, it was legitimately 1 year to the day after I released Mistakes of the Emperor 5. And there have been several people involved that I have talked to about, um, my intentions for 6. I had always talked about wanting to put 6 out, wanting to finish 6. And a lot of people tried. A lot of people did their best to help, and I appreciate all of them. I appreciate Griffin of Might. I appreciate, of course, Arco and Strider. Strider, as much as hashtag blame Strider's a thing, um, uh, Strider actually is the voice of Armin as well as a whole bunch of other characters. And Strider, Arco, um, a few other people, Emperor Eagle, I can always rely on them to, be able to, like, provide voice lines if needed. Also, Not a Panther was the voice of Belisarius Cull. Not Belisarius Cull, but Hector Belisarius, which was a lot of fun. But I was missing the voice of the first officer. And I had been missing the voice of the first officer for a while. Every single time I opened up the folder that had the scripts for what I was going to do next, as far as 5-ish minute lore, any lore video, period, Heresy the Betrayed, the Commissar story, anything like that. Every script and suggestion page, there was always one script that was there that had not been put to a video. It had been there for over a year. In fact, I finished the script for Mistakes in the Emperor 6 before 5 even premiered. And then one day, I'm sitting in Discord, and Not a Panther contacts me and he says, "Hey, do you have some time? Baltimore wants to talk." And all of a sudden, like, I had a couple of things that I was getting ready to do, but then it was like, Baltimore wants to speak to me. Senpai has noticed me. Okay, I'm fine. What's up? And Baltimore came in, and he is just as awesome as he is an absolutely outstanding person. And the conversation we had was really chill. It was really a big relief to talk to him. And I asked him if he would be willing to do a voice role. And he jumped at it. At the same time, there is, like, I sent him the lines, he got the lines done, and then promptly I had my schedule turned to trash, but I was always working on 6. And I finished it, and I can't believe it's done. So you guys have no idea. When I hit the thing for that, and I saw the premiere come up, I was just when I put the premiere up, I just sat there and I stared at it for like 5 minutes, going, "This is actually happening." Just for some of you people that are newer to the channel, the last time when I put out Mistakes of the Emperor 5. The channel was half its current size. The channel was half its current size. I had not been doing, like, 5-ish minute lore wasn't a thing. In fact, there was, like, very few people in the Discord. I think about 50 people were in the Discord at that time. And it was a whole, like, different channel back then. But I'm hoping I'm going to be able to continue doing it. With all that being said, let me take a look and see what you guys. Let's just look over here. My brain is kind of like, I'm kind of de-stressing right now, which is something. Dark Innovator asked, isn't the Golden Throne only really heavy psychic dependent after it was damaged by Magnus's folly? No. It would always need a powerful psyker. The reason it burnt out Malkador is because Malkador was using the cyclic amplification to hold back the entirety of the warp from flooding in. If Malkador had failed, Terra would have been swallowed by a warp, basically a warp rift that would have mirrored the Eye of Terror itself. Phallius says there's a theory that the Emperor made a pact with lesser warp gods to become the souls of the Primarchs, but Chaos viewed it as stealing food. Actually, he made a deal with the Chaos gods themselves, and then he promptly broke it. The Emperor made Magnus. He could have made a second one to run the Golden Throne. Not accurate. Close, but not accurate. Sotha says, we need mention the extensions to the webway. It would have required more Golden Thrones, and Alpha Plus Psychers are an exceedingly rare commodity. All they would have needed to power the Golden Throne is one powerful Psyker sitting there, keeping the apparatus stable. With that being done, the Golden Throne could have kept on going with as many branches as they wanted to put in for any length of time. Phallius says, in the Blood Angels omnibus, the head psyker, Lord of Death, pondered on two angels fighting in the warp when Sanguinius died. Whenever the dark one gets the upper hand, the black rage is more common. I did not know that, but have I read the dark? I'm an idiot. Have I read the Blood Angels omnibus yet? I have no idea. Adrian says, by the way, I don't think MOT 5 is in the lore playlist. Every other MOT is in there. I'll have to check that because there's a lot of videos. I have a lot of them. Dark Innovator says, do you think the Emperor made a deal with Chaos, or did he take power and knowledge from elsewhere in the warp? And of course, Chaos thinks all the warp belonged to them. This is very true. This is extremely true. He did make a deal with Chaos, and then he promptly broke it, which is why they went against him so hard. He managed to hide what he was going to try to do from them, which is kind of a weird thing, but at the same time, it is what it is with that. It's kind of a weird thing. It's kind of a flubbed part of the lore that I'd like to see them go into. We do know whereabouts it happened. I can't remember the planet's name, but Horus did realize that at some point, the Emperor had gone to a planet that was where the threshold between the warp and real space was kind of stretched, and it could be gone through. And the Emperor went through there, and Horus watched him do it, and Horus made it to where the Emperor would go in and remove that memory for him. He did it voluntarily. Phallius says, the warp is vast, and the Chaos Gods hold large parts of the warp, but it's endless, and the Enslavers still hold part of the warp in the book, The Long Vigil Death Watch Anthology. Molech? No. Yeah, actually, yes, Molech. The planet itself was called Molech. Thanks, guys. Thanks for reminding me. But the Emperor did have an instance where he actually communicated with them. Chaos, but Dark Innovator asks, but Chaos doesn't care about stable warp portals, so is that strange? The deal that was made, we don't know the details of. But we do know at that point the Eldar were too few to actually sustain the Chaos Gods. They were too few at that point. The Chaos Gods at that point were relying kind of on humanity as basically an IV, and the Emperor was pretty much telling them that would be allowed to continue. He just wanted to conquer the galaxy. That is my headcanon as far as that goes, because we don't know what was actually done. In any case, sorry guys, my ears bother me more than usual. This infection's taking a long time to clear. Diclonia says, your brain cells got a stay of execution. I did not have enough free time to finish the chapter of my blasphemous bit. Alright. Who's ready for the All Guardsmen Party Tyranid Delivery Experts, parts 5 through 8? We have watched the first 4 parts of this, and it has been an utter train wreck thus far. I just don't know why Nubby is kept alive. I don't understand. Dark Innovator says, personally, I feel like we're missing something because the Emperor was the anathema for the longest time, but the Chaos Gods were implied to have always been his enemies. They have always been implied to be his enemies, and time is not a thing for them, so they had to have known that he was going to do something like this. And see, that's why it's unclear whether the Emperor actually planned for all of this to begin with. We just don't know. Odeth, no, yes, I did. Let me scroll up and see if I can find it real quick. Odeth, question, what do you expect from this episode of the All Guardsmen Party? Utter anarchy. Obsidia Black, guys, he hit his head and got, psychically merged with a weird boy. Guys, take some pity on him. Nubby is comic relief. I understand that, but sometimes he just makes me cringe to the point of breaking bones. Alright. The All Guardsmen Party. Who's ready to go? You ready to go? I'm ready to go. X is up in the chat if you're ready to go for All Guardsmen Party Tyranid Delivery Expert. Did I ever get the Sigismund audiobook? Yes, I did. The others keep Nubby alive for the crippling fear that his replacement would actually be worse. No kidding. Alright, so, here we go. Tyranid Delivery Experts, Part 5. Let's get into the horror. Embrace the suck, because it is here.
By the 6th day, it was becoming apparent that holding out for 2 more weeks would be close to impossible. The unexpected increase in the Ghostnid's strength and their new penchant for the occasional focused attack forced our lines back days ahead of schedule. And the initial ship-wide increase in phenomena we'd seen was getting worse. It was actually beginning to feel like the Geller field was failing, except old Bill was certain it wasn't, and the usual whispers and blood seepage had been replaced with far-off chittering sounds and Tyranid ichor. It was obvious the zoanthrope was...
Is this the wrong episode? Because I didn't remember them... Wait a second. This is Tyranid Delivery Experts, episode 5. Is this the wrong... One second. Because this says part 5 in their playlist. One second. Let me make sure I got the right one. Part 3, part 4. Oh. What the hell? Oh my god, I'm an idiot. Tyranid Acquisition Experts. Okay, there we go. Part 5. Okay. Oh my god, there's so much of this. I clicked the wrong one. Tyranid Acquisition. Oh my god, we're here forever on this one. One second. Alright, now we are at the right one. Now we're at the right one. Oh my god, this is terrifying.
By the time we'd finished reloading, they'd found a slightly less rock-covered hilltop that was emitting lightning. This time we had a clear view, and the lightning was obviously coming from a snaky-looking Xenos, which perfectly matched the images of zoanthropes we'd seen. Gravis and his scout did not find it amusing when Sarge asked for Twitch's opinion anyway. Luckily for everyone's nerves, Twitch was too concussed to be smug, and simply agreed that the bug looked like a bug. As our shuttle neared the hill, we realized that this drop was going to be nastier than the last. This time, instead of a free-for-all, the hill was clearly in Tyranid hands/claws/whatever.
Yeah.
And it looked fairly critical to the local battle with the Greenskins. The Nids definitely weren't going to let us wipe out their artillery without a fight. They'd reinforced it as heavily as they could manage. Perimeter duty would not be another cakewalk, and if it took too long to subdue the Psyker, we'd be up to our asses in bugs. Sarge quickly split us into pairs, assigned us to the 3 main approaches to the hill, and convinced Twitch to share his mines with us. We'd clear the area, push out, then plant the mines and fall back towards the top if things got hairy. Before anything more complex could be put together, we reached the DZ. Sergeant Gravis was the first one down again. He leaned out the rear hatch, sighted the zoanthrope, and pretty much dropped right on top of the Psyker. The rest of us followed as quickly and professionally as we could manage.
Thank you, Daniel Morgan. I really do appreciate it, bud. Star Wars vs. 40k theory. Whoever wins the Axum will get Exterminatus. Jedi casualties rival Order 66. The Skywatch goes to Coruscant simply to wipe out the Senate. Palpatine will be the Republic's leader. The Republic will be reorganized into a new galactic empire for a safe, secure society. That is... Yeah... I don't know if whoever wins the Axum will get Exterminatus, but... And Jedi casualties, I don't think would rival Order... Well, yeah, they will rival Order 66 if what you say happens. Very true. Extremely true. This would be the thing that makes Palpatine not the Supreme Chancellor, but the Emperor. So... I'm wondering if the Space Marines are going to be like, not for the Emperor anymore, but for our Emperor, fuck yours. I'm thinking that. Thank you, Daniel. I really do appreciate it, bud. I really do.
None of us even had to be pushed out of the shuttle by the scout this time.
Yes, fighting.
Every single one of us landed with our weapons firing. There were 7 or 8 Termagants keeping the Zoanthrope company, and only one of them was still alive when we hit the ground. Sarge
Guys, stop robbing Daniel, please. Thank you, Daniel.
Finished that one off, and we all fanned out towards our assigned areas. We moved fast, motivated by a desire to get our choke points set up before reinforcements arrived, and to get something solid between us and Gravis's fight with the Zoanthrope.
X in the chat at Nuke War.
Honestly, we hadn't taken the space...
Oh wait, sorry. Cancel that. F in the chat to pay respects to Warden for his accurate statement. Thank you, Slacker. Thank you, Slacker. My headcanon for Conrad's obsession with Vulcan is because he failed to die when Conrad's vision said he should have, and if the vision is wrong on Vulcan, then what else has been wrong? Conrad couldn't handle being wrong. You're accurate in that to the point of absurdity. His biggest scare is that he was wrong. And if you've read the primer book for Conrad Curse, if you have not read that, I recommend you read it. Only bring a bucket because it gets downright nasty at times. Yeah, Ronnie, loyal Space Marines would shout death to the false Emperor. Yes, I fully anticipate that happening. Oh, God. Oh, God, I can't wait for it. Thank you, Slacker. I really do appreciate it, bud.
Space Marine too seriously up to that point. I mean, We respected him and found him daunting as hell, but his combat performance in the last drop hadn't been up to the stories you hear about Space Marines. His fight with the Tyranid Psyker, though, that was something you tell your grandkids about. In the few seconds we saw him fighting before we got under cover, Sergeant Gravis baited out and dodged 3 massive lightning bolts, scored twice as many hits on the Xenos' bubble shield, and generally moved with more speed and grace than should have been possible. Abstractly, we'd known that the Emperor's Scythes chapter were the best experts available when it came to fighting Tyranids, but watching Gravis play that Zoanthrope like a fiddle really drove it home. We all would have stopped to spectate, if the Zoanthrope's misses weren't blowing the rocks near us into red-hot shrapnel, that is. Anyway, we all got the hell off that hilltop and into position. Spot stayed up high and gave us a good view of the incoming reinforcements. As we set our mines and found the best lines of fire, we all finished our preparations just in time, and started mowing down the first wave of Tyranids as they climbed the hill. That first wave was nothing but the Gaunts, both varieties, that had been near the hill. Thanks to the wonderful nature of choke points, not to mention good firing positions and techno-heretically awesome weapons, we were able to kill them before they managed to shoot or claw us. That's not to say that we actually killed all the Tyranids. Nids don't tend to run out of bodies to throw at a problem.
Yeah, kind of like orcs.
But we did convince them to rethink their strategy. Once the choke points were choked with their bodies for any more to get past, the Gaunts broke off to wait for heavier reinforcements. Now, we'd been in this sort of fight with Nids before. Back when we were actually in the Guard, we'd fought a memorable and debatably successful defensive battle against the bugs. So we knew what would almost certainly come next. Warriors, possibly with Ravener or Gargoyle support. On our respective sides of the hill, Amy, Nubby, and Tink all moved to elevated positions and helped Sarge watch for the higher life forms. Meanwhile, those of us still on the ground made sure the mines in our positions were ready. And Sarge checked in with Gravis and his scout. The Marines were still working on wearing down the Zoanthrope's shields without killing it, and asked us not to distract them again. We all made some rather unkind comments at that last part, but refrained from transmitting any of them. Spot the Wonder Drone tagged the second wave on its way.
I love how the fucking Tau drone is called Spot the Wonder Drone.
In. And as we had guessed, there were some warriors directing the charge from behind the initial meat shield. The Guard has a standard combat doctrine for pretty much any situation. While most of these are not very individual Guardsman friendly, the one for that sort of attack is a good one. So, for once we did things by the book. Admittedly, said book is rather short, but that just means it's easy to remember. The 3 of us that had moved into sniper positions held our fire, and prepared to shoot the big one first.
It is amazing how much Tyranid combat goes down to shoot the little ones and shoot the big ones, and when to do each of those.
On Doc and Tank's flank, an overcharged Tau laser thingy-guided plasma bolt turned their warrior into chunky salsa. Over on Amy and Twitch's, a precision headshot from our actually quite talented markswoman took out theirs. With the Synapse creatures dead, the Gaunts lost cohesion, and both pairs of Guardsmen easily mowed them down. Unfortunately, the sniper on our third flank was Nubby, who didn't have Tink's anti-armor weaponry or Amy's accuracy.
Oh god.
A very angry, if rather burnt and bloody, Tyranid warrior immediately returned fire with one of those big B-gun thingies, pinning Nubby down on his sniper perch.
Yeah.
Sarge tried to hold off the incoming wave himself, making heavy use of his grenades and the choke point, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't going to work. Sarge calmed the rest of us, and over Nubby's shrill screaming, asked if anyone could give him support before he had to blow his mines and relocate. The rest of us were still rather busy with our mop-ups, and reinforcing Sarge meant crossing the Zoanthrope-infested hilltop. So we all declined. It seemed like Sarge was going to have to give up his flank safety margin, and he was getting ready to blow his mines and pull Nubby out, when the Scout Marine told him to hold a little longer.
Okay.
Sarge managed it. He wound up having to use his boots to keep an especially persistent Gaunt off while he reloaded.
No.
And his armor and beefiness barely saved him from a few flesh borer hits. But he managed it.
No.
Right as things were getting downright dire, the warrior and several nearby Gaunts went down to an amazing display of precision shooting.
Nice.
Nubby finally got his ass out of cover and helped Sarge turn the tide back around as the scout returned to the Zoanthrope fight. Things were looking pretty good, even if we could see the third wave mustering near the bottom of the hill. Good changed to great when we heard Gravis say the Zoanthrope's shield was almost down. And then everything went to shit.
Of course it went to shit.
Looking back, it's not that hard to spot the exact moment when the shitting of everything occurred. Actually, it wasn't that hard to spot at the time either. Within 20 seconds of it happening, we knew what had gone wrong and why.
Oh boy.
But it took a bit longer for all the horrible results of that one screw-up to manifest. Anyway, what started that whole shit show was a simple communications failure at a rather hectic moment.
Okay.
The third wave of Tyranids was coming in, and we were busy shooting them and getting ready to blow our mines and fall back. Up on top of the hill, Sergeant Gravis had the Zoanthrope on the ropes and was ordering his scout to get ready to trank it. The Scout Marine had just returned from helping Sarge and was perched on one of the pointy pillars on top of the hill.
Okay.
As the scout got the trank ready and lined up what must have been a rather tricky shot, he spotted something and calmed us. His exact words were, "Interrogator. Incoming Tyranid assault flyer. North side." Now, let's do an experiment.
Okay.
First, go out and find 50,000 Guardsmen.
Right.
Actually, go out and get 100.
Okay.
It's not like Guardsmen are hard to find. Hell, we're literally the largest organized fighting force in the galaxy.
True.
Which, come to think of it, means that the definition of a standard response to anything is what we do, not what a few bloody crazies stomping around in power armor and getting eaten by bugs. Anyway. Ask any of these guardsmen what they'll do when someone warns them hostile air units are incoming. Nothing else, no details or orders, just hostile air incoming.
Oh god damn
You know what
it.
they'll say? It'll be the same regardless of regiment, specialization, rank, or anything. Every single one of them will tell you the same thing. They will get the hell into cover.
Right!
Apparently, the Emperor's Scythes chapter of the Space Marines aren't on the same page as the rest of us, though.
Right.
Or at least that Scout Marine wasn't. I mean, if he'd just been a little more clear, if he'd added a few more bloody words like take it out, or cover me, or even if he'd just shortened it to incoming assault,
Right.
we would have understood. But no. He told us there was a flyer incoming, and stood there with his ass hanging out, wrongly believing that we'd shoot it down while he lined up his shot on the Zoanthrope. Nubby was the first one to notice the impending disaster. Well, actually, he just saw the scout standing there and told Sarge that the stupid bastard's gonna get his ass shot off. Sarge stared for a second, then peeked out of cover and saw what sort of flyer was incoming. Everything started to click together. The incoming Tyranid wasn't some dedicated air bioform designed to strafe or bomb ground targets.
Right.
It was the biggest, meanest melee monstrosity in the swarm. Or at least, the biggest one that was still capable of flight.
Okay.
It was a Flyrant. A winged hive tyrant.
No.
The Tyranid equivalent of a Lord General crossed with a main battle tank, and with some wings strapped on for good measure.
You see, that whole concept and description is fucked up. That whole concept and description is just wrong.
It was big, pissed, and coming right at the only member of our team that was standing out in the open.
The sniper.
Unfortunately, Sarge was just a little too late. By the time he'd started shouting his warning, nearly 5 tons of flying Tyranid hit the Scout Marine in the back.
Right. Yay!
You know how in cartoons a bus or train hits someone and they'll just sort of vanish? It was exactly like that. Right down to how the poor bastard's sniper rifle was left pinwheeling in the air for a second. In the aftermath, 3 things became apparent. The scout had not gotten his shot off.
Right.
The physically exhausted Zoanthrope was doing a runner, and Gravis had bigger problems than chasing it. The Space Marine told us that the Zoanthrope was fleeing towards Sarge, asked us to catch it, and then started shouting about some place called Sotha. A second later, the tyrant let out a scream that shook the entire hilltop. The situation was bad, but it was also, thank the Emperor, relatively simple. We had a perimeter to maintain, a hive tyrant to survive,
Right.
and a Zoanthrope to catch.
Right.
Sarge started bellowing out orders, and the rest of us scrambled to follow them. Since we still had all of our mines in place, the perimeter was actually the least pressing issue. Sarge's first order was to fall back towards the top of the hill and let the explosives hold off the smaller Tyranids for a while. Sarge then told us he was going after the Zoanthrope, and sent Nubby to get the scout's tranq-loaded sniper rifle. For the rest of us, Sarge's final orders were a little more free-form.
Okay. The sheer fact that they're going after the Space Marine Scout sniper rifle, I don't know how one person's going to hold that damn thing, because it's a huge rifle, okay? It's massive.
Tank was to get his drone on the Hive Tyrant, and the rest of us were told to handle it. Seriously, that was his entire master plan. By the Emperor, there's a bloody Hive Tyrant inside our perimeter. It's killed 1 Space Marine, and as soon as it finishes off the other, it'll kill us all. What should we do, sir? Handle it! He never managed to live that one down.
No.
The ridiculousness of that order aside, it's not like we actually needed one. Each of us knew that the only way we'd live through this was if the tyrant was dead, forced to retreat, or kept distracted long enough for us to call and board the shuttle. All 3 of these possible solutions could be accomplished in the same way, by shooting the big bug and running away if it chased us. Some variations in improv could be thrown in as things progressed, but shoot and run was really the core strategy.
Alright, look, Obsidia, I understand that you have an orc, like, possessing you at this moment, but you can't go around smacking people, okay? You can't go around smacking people.
Even the Space Marine was doing it, though it was more stab and run in his case. The first of us to actually see the Hive Tyrant up close were Amy and Twitch. As they ran up towards the hilltop, Sergeant Gravis started coming down in these big graceful leaps made possible by his grav chute. Valiant heroes of the Imperium that both of them were, they immediately scrambled to find hiding places. As the massive Tyranid charged down after Gravis, both of them held their fire.
Kiefer, you shouldn't have done that. That's sick. No.
Not to mention their breaths, and observed what they could. The Flyrant was, of course, a winged bipedal bug that stood 6 meters tall and was made of distilled murder and hate. But it also had a few important distinguishing points. It had 4 arms, well, 3-ish after Gravis had gotten its attention.
Okay.
The top 1.5 ended in the usual Tyranid talons.
Right.
The bottom pair held a massive bone sword, and one of those freaky sentient whip things.
Ugh. Yes, everybody in the chat, Kiefer said something heretical. Please nuke him and show them the Ariel's ways. X is in chat to nuke the heretic.
Each of those weapons was capable of messily killing any poor guardsman that got in close, but none of them had real range. That was a very good thing for us. Not so much for Gravis, though. Speaking of Sergeant Gravis, he was coming down the hill fast. But the Flyrant was gaining and he didn't have much room left to run before he hit Twitch and Amy's minefield. Right as it looked like he was going to try jumping over it and then wading through the incoming wave of Nids, he suddenly reversed direction.
Okay.
All three of the Flyrant's attacks missed the Space Marine as, with more speed and agility than anyone wearing the equivalent of a light tank should have, he dodged between the beast's legs. It was impressive as hell, especially the part where he got in a whack with his power sword on his way through. Both Amy and Twitch watched appreciatively until they realized the Flyrant wasn't going to be able to stop. The 4.9-ton Tyranid flailed its wings in a mad attempt to get airborne, completely failed to do so, and plowed through over a dozen AP mines. Twitch and Amy barely made it to new cover in time.
Nice. Mr. Reich, you mishandle it.
Of course, it takes more than a few AP mines to kill a hive tyrant.
True.
Aside from shredding its wings, all they really seemed to do was piss it off. The tyrant let out another of its piercing shrieks as it reversed direction, and started pelting back up the hill after Gravis. Twitch and Amy watched it go, then realized they had a bit of a problem. Namely, that there was no longer much of a minefield between them and the wave of smaller Tyranids.
Mm-hmm.
The debate over what to do consisted of Amy and Twitch pointing in opposite directions, yelling "handle it" at each other, then splitting up. Twitch ran around dropping the last of his mines and spraying fire at the incoming gaunts. Amy sprinted up the hill after Gravis and the Flyrant, hip-firing her pulse rifle at the massive target until it crested the hill as she lost line of sight. When Amy reached the top of the hill, she found Sergeant Gravis carefully circling around the enraged Flyrant, while Doc and Tink shot it. Like the other two guardsmen, she sighted on the Tau marker thingy Spot was projecting on the Tyranid, and poured as much fire as she could. It was beginning to look like the three of them would be able to wear the creature down. And then Gravis botched one of his dodges.
Ronnie says, this takes me back to military days when my orders were figure it out. My orders were silence. Like, absolute silence. That's what I got. I got told to do the most ridiculous crap on the planet, and then, well, how should I carry this out? Crickets.
The Space Marine had to choose between trying to block the Flyrant's bone sword or dying a horrible death, and reluctantly chose the former. For the second time that day, he flew through the air with all the grace and aerodynamics of a thrown brick. Sergeant Gravis ricocheted off of one of the stone spires encircling the hilltop, briefly stumbled upwards, then crashed into the dirt directly behind Doc and Tink. He was a tough bastard, though. Within a second of his landing, he started moving again. Both the Space Marine and his power armor groaned as he struggled to get back on his feet. The Flyrant let out yet another roar, sighted on the recovering Space Marine, and charged.
Yay!
Now, in your normal...
Now, there's a few things that would get my attention faster than anything else, and one of them is a charging hive tyrant with wings. That's like legitimately, I think at least number 2 or number 3 on things that would get my instant attention. Number 1, of course, being Conrad Kurz saying he was getting bored. I would very, very much not like to be around when that was uttered. But I think a charging hive tyrant would be second on that list, just because of the fact that damn thing would be bigger than an office building. Everybody's talking about their glorious military experiences right there. Mr. Wright, can you eat Tyranid meat? Depends on the Tyranid, but would you really want to? I mean, the Space Marines would, but would you? I got a feeling there's some shit in there. I got a feeling there's more growth hormones in there. If you eat that as a teenager, you're going to be 12 feet tall.
Commissariat-approved, uplifting story of heroism. This is where the two stalwart guardsmen would have stood their ground and laid down their lives to buy the wounded Space Marine time to recover.
Fuck this.
Then, right after the guardsmen had finished valiantly sacrificing themselves, he would have magically gotten better and killed the vile Xenos.
Yes.
Oh, and then all the orcs and Tyranids on the planet would have died, and the whole place would have turned into a garden world that paid all its tithes on time.
Right.
And there'd be statues of the heroic dead guardsmen everywhere. The warp take those stories, and whoever keeps writing them. And the whole commissariat, for that matter.
Hey!
Ever notice how it's always some guardsman and never the commissar who dies horribly in the Emperor's name? Anyway.
That's not my job. My job is to make sure you do.
Doc and Tink took one look at the charging Flyrant and ran for it. Okay. I realize that sounds bad. But it's not like they ran down the hill and left Gravis to die.
Right.
They kept firing and ran perpendicularly along the top of the hill in, and I quote the official report here, an attempt to draw the Hive Tyrant's attention away from its target. Anyway, it's not like they would have accomplished anything by standing there, and there was no way either of them could have carried a fully armored Space Marine to safety. My point is that what happened next was not Doc, Tink's, or anyone else's fault. And I'll have you know that the Tribunal of Senior Ordos Xenos Inquisitors who reviewed Spot's footage agreed with that assessment.
Wait a minute. Pause. They reviewed a Taldron's footage and they're still alive? Okay.
2/3 of the Tribunal, anyway. So while 3 of us poured a hell of a lot of plasma into the Flyrant, it closed to melee range with Sergeant Gravis. He parried the beast's whip thing, sidestepped a strike from its single remaining talon, and did that trick where he dodged through its legs again. Whereupon the Flyrant turned, brought its bone sword around at mid-chest level, and cut Gravis in half.
F in chat for Gravis.
Twitch finished laying his replacement minefield and arrived on the hilltop right then, as did Sarge and Nubby, who were lugging the tranked zoanthrope between them.
Nice!
Their part of what could generously be called the plan hadn't involved anything as terrifying as the Flyrant, but it hadn't been a cakewalk either.
So, would Gravis be in... Would he be in the poker room? And if he is in the poker room, did they just take his half and sit him on top of the table? Or is the bottom half going to be walking around? Or are both halves going to be in there? Can we refurbish the Space Marine with a stapler? I'm just asking.
Sarge had managed to sight the fleeing zoanthrope as it came down the hill towards him. It turned out that even when too exhausted to keep itself hovering, the Psyker bugs are capable of wriggling around the ground at a surprisingly high speed. While Nubby hunted down the scout's dropped rifle and its trank round, Sarge chased the zoanthrope back and forth between the rocks, dodging the occasional weak lightning bolt and stray flesh borer around as he did so.
Oh, yay.
Eventually, he cornered the beastie between 2 spires right as Nubby arrived with the comically oversized Astartes pattern sniper rifle.
I know!
Since it quickly became apparent that Nubby was completely incapable of aiming the oversized rifle, and the zoanthrope was still squirming around a lot, Sarge decided to take the shot himself. The second he was distracted, the bug tried to escape again, and Sarge wound up tackling the thing and trying to pin it to the ground. It was like wrestling a cross between a greased pig, a giant snake, and an uninsulated power conduit.
Oh my god.
In the end, he collected a few scratches, a nasty bite wound, and a whole lot of electrical burns before Nubby just dragged the rifle over and jammed it into the zoanthrope's underbelly. Then they hauled the surprisingly long and heavy Xenos up to the hilltop, pausing to chuck a few grenades at the incoming wave of Nid reinforcements
Because
on the way.
grenades are always needed, guys. Grenades
And got
are
there
always
just
needed.
in time to see Gravis's bisection. There was a brief silence, which was punctuated by two meaty thuds and Nubby's nasal voice. Holy shit! Think he's gonna be okay? Then the Flyrant...
Do you guys hear that? Did Nubby actually ask if a bisected Space Marine was going to be okay? X in the chat to nuke Nubby, come on. What in the world is that? Okay, I don't know. Okay. Have no idea what that noise was. Jeez. Sarge went to hands with a Nid. It's great.
Roared again, and all six of us opened fire. Spot was projecting its Tau laser thingy on the middle of the Flyrant's torso, and we all just sighted our weapons on it and held the triggers down. Looking back, it's hard to say whether it was the sheer weight of fire or if the big bastard was just running out of energy. But its charge towards us was much slower than its...
Mr. Reich, did you just honestly do a Miami Vice in my chat? He just needs to walk it off. Yeah! Okay.
Earlier ones had been. Every single one of us got an entire magazine's worth of shots out before the Flyrant was a third of the way to Sarge and Nubby.
Ugh.
It never made it 2/3. There was a sort of squelchy pop as its torso armor gave way and the beast stumbled. It sorta huddled there, trying to protect its wounded chest, and sent out a screech that was echoed by the smaller Tyranids climbing the hill.
CSI
From the sound
Miami.
of it, they were finally...
Alright, fine. Nuke me again. X in chat to nuke me for not remembering a show from the 90s.
...getting past our minefields, and would be arriving in seconds. None of us went to hold off the incoming reinforcements, though. The Flyrant was the very definition of the big one, and we were gonna shoot it first.
Mm-hmm.
Spot redirected its marker light to the Xenos' head. Not that we actually needed the fancy Tau flashlight, though. Even if the Flyrant's head was a relatively small target, it was a stationary one now.
Right.
Every shot we fired hit, and within seconds our massed plasma fire either punched through the Tyranid's head armor or cooked the thing's brains to boiling point.
Nice.
Its head exploded like a particularly disgusting grenade, and a psychic pressure that none of us had even noticed was released. All around the hilltop, the incoming Tyranids broke and fled as quickly as they could,
Synapse
and the
creatures.
Zoanthrope twitched a little where Sergeant Nubby had dropped it. Let me tell you, we'd escaped near certain death before, but the relief we all felt on that barren hilltop was the greatest in our lives.
Yay!
Every one of us just stood there and basked in the sheer joy of still being alive. Then Tink spoiled it by asking if Gravis had called the shuttle before he died.
What the fuck? Come on. Alright.
Tink's question was followed by the sound of a few thousand orcs whying. And it occurred to us that we probably just killed the creature that had been holding the Tyranid defense of these hills together.
Yay!
I doubt anyone in the history of the Imperium has gone from ecstatic relief to blind panic as quickly as we did. Sarge started wildly flipping through comm channels. Twitch ran around deploying the last of his explosives. Amy screamed at Tink for not remembering sooner, and Tink called Amy a skunk-haired super bitch. The odd men out were Doc, who'd gone right past panic to depression, and Nubby, who defaulted to some very basic instincts when overwhelmed. While everyone else was busy screaming, shouting, mining, and crying,
Right.
Nubby went to get himself a shiny, not quite new power sword.
A refurbished power sword?
The cretinous little vulture found the sword still in Gravis's hand, which didn't deter him even slightly. He firmly planted a boot on the Marine's arm and started prying at the power-armored fist. As Nubby levered off the smallest of the Marine's fingers, two practically reflexive, actions occurred.
Uh-huh.
First, Gravis shook Nubby's grip off and tightened his fingers on the power sword. Second, Nubby automatically responded by drawing his combat knife and preparing to give the Emperor's peace, thereby settling any silly little ownership disputes.
He's still alive! And Nubby's gonna fucking stab him.
It was immensely lucky for all of us that Gravis's ceramite helmet was still sealed, since it made trying to slit his throat a long and noisy process. Doc noticed Nubby going at the Space Marine's armored neck like an incompetent lumberjack, realized what it implied, and body-checked Nubby off the not-quite-dead Sergeant Gravis. Our brilliant medic then stood there with his
Why? He's trying... The poor fucker is laying in half. His legs are way the fuck over there. And you're trying to stab him to death through the neck. Oh my god, I love this series.
medkit open, panicking and trying to figure out how to treat the mother of all chest wounds.
Right.
The commotion caught Sarge's attention in turn, and he abandoned his fruitless attempts to contact the shuttle by randomly trying comm channels. Sarge's first question wasn't if Doc was sure if Gravis was still alive, or how that was even possible.
Right.
It was whether the Space Marine was capable of calling for evac. Doc gibbered and pointed out that Gravis's lungs had been cut in half.
Right.
And he could actually see inside them. Doc took that as a no, but noticed Nubby's knife stuck between Gravis's helmet and gorget. Without waiting for a medical opinion, he seized the knife and twisted it with all his beefy non-com strength. Later, it was explained to Sarge, but not Nubby, that the latches on Mark 7 power armor helmets don't actually lock, and he could have just flipped them open. At the time, though, Sarge was too busy to waste time thinking, and just tore apart several million thrones worth of data relays and void seals.
Very good.
When the helmet finally came off, with a tear and a snap rather than a little pop, Sarge ran over to where Amy was beating several kinds of shit out of Tink. He ended their friendly little argument over who the real bitch was by grabbing the back of Amy's orc-stained armor and unceremoniously chucking her in Twitch's direction. Sarge then dragged Tink to his...
This is the best fucking shit ever. We're dealing with a wall of orcs between two armies of orcs and Tyranids. But I'm gonna beat the shit out of Tank. I could, yeah.
His feet, thrust Gravis's helmet into the techie's hands, and screamed at him to make the Vox work. Tink stared at the helmet for a second, realized he had absolutely no idea how it worked, and wisely decided to try the obvious thing first. Which is to say, he put the helmet on his head and hesitantly asked if the thing was on. He was nearly deafened by the shuttle pilot's screaming request to know what the hell was going on and what had happened to Sergeant Gravis. Tink decided that Sarge could answer that question, handed the helmet over with a little smug line about being able to fix anything,
Oh my
and
God.
went to see if Doc had anything for a broken nose. He immediately regretted that decision.
Oh god.
So Sarge was wearing the helmet and explaining things to the shuttle pilot. Twitch was being Twitch, and since it looked like we actually wouldn't all be left stranded in the middle of an army of orcs, both Nubby and Amy decided it was time to take a breather.
Okay.
They sat on the trank zoanthrope, shared a pack of low sticks, and enjoyed the sight of Doc freaking the hell out and shaking Tink like a terrier with a rat. Oh god, what do I do? I don't know, fix him or something.
Handle it! Refurbish him!
Stop shaking me! How, Tink? How do you fix being cut in half? He shouldn't even be alive. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know how Space Marines work. What if touching him makes him stop working? What do I do? Do that Space Marine thing. What thing? Harvest his gene seed. His what now? His gene seed. It's like the thing, the seed thing that Space Marines have.
Oh, God.
If you pull it out before a Marine dies, you can plant it in a servitor and he grows back from it.
What?
Really?
What?
Yeah, they had this whole thing in the last season where Brother Captain Marcus the Cooperative fell in battle, and the
What the hell is he talking about?
Warrior Rescue Team had to... Wait, you mean in Talvids?
Oh my God.
You're basing this off of heretical cartoons?
He is.
They're not cartoons, they're not heretical, and
They
do you
are
have anything
cartoons.
better?
They are heretical.
Shit. Okay, what's this gene seed look like, and where does he keep it? They had to censor the part where they cut it out, but I think it was like a second heart thing, and it was all green
God.
and stuff. A heart thing, so like, in the middle of the chest. Yeah.
I can only imagine them sitting in front of a whole bunch of people explaining to them that they figured out how to assist the Space Marine through the wonders of Tal anime. In particular, what would be the Tal anime's name? I don't know. Bunny Girl, like, some shit, I don't know. What was it? Hannah 2.0 is not Dusa or some shit. Thank you, Slacker. If Gene Seed worked that way, we'd have a legion of Sigismunds. Abaddon's worst nightmare. Yes. Oh my God, that would be absolutely horrifying. Yeah, X to nuke tank. Thank you, Slacker. I really do appreciate it, bud. But Jesus, this series is the gift that keeps on giving.
Ow, right in the middle. Okay, in the chest, upper chest or lower chest? Upper chest or lower chest? I'm going to be digging around inside him for something green. I at least need to know which end to dig around in. I don't know. Why don't you check on the scout? The scout marine was pinned to the hilltop's ground, a few dozen meters away from where he'd been perching when the flyrant hit him. I'm using pinned quite literally here.
Right.
He was face down with a Tyranid talon the size of a beefy telephone pole through his back. The talon ended in a very neat cut that matched the stump the flyrant had, which probably explained how Gravis had gotten its attention.
Right.
Unlike Gravis, there wasn't much confusion over whether the scout was dead. He'd started to go...
Okay, look. Gravis isn't dead. And if Gravis isn't dead and he's literally cut off from the chest down, I'm not looking at anything as in, well, he's definitely dead.
Runny. It's not like all of him was melting, just a sort of expanding area around where he'd been speared. Said area included both the upper and lower chest, though.
Okay.
In the name of medical science, Doc poked at the mushy corpse with a probe, then jumped backwards with a girly shout when it started to hiss and melt too.
Yay.
Emperor. I swear he wasn't doing that earlier. Is this like a Space Marine thing? Do they melt when they die? You don't think so. Would make it hard to reuse the armor. Betcha it's a Nid thing. Does your big booko pseudoscientific medical bullshit have a section on Tyranid bioweapons? Tyranid, Tyrant, Bone Sword, Scything Talent, Toxin Sacs.
Yay.
Neat. What's it say? If in fully stocked field hospital, laboratorium, quarantine... Here! Battlefield instructions. Smear area with counterseptic. Administer oral detox. Scan and apply indicated toxin wands. Give plasma. Pray to the Emperor. I can do all of those things. Wait, like plasma from a gun or a bag? And what about the gene seed, though?
Oh my god.
Screw your gene seed. If we can keep him from melting until the shuttle arrives, we can ask the pilot.
Right.
Now take these and go to his bottom half. These are pills, Doc. How do I give a pair of legs pills? How do you think? Oh, God.
No. No.
I am not qualified for this. Well, neither am I.
Oh my god, the Space Marines are coming. And they're gonna... This is defiling.
Fine. Now do it! Doc's panicked medical treatments were of rather dubious usefulness.
Right.
Especially the part where he fed a detox tab to the nearly dead Space Marine. That stuff is nearly enough to kill you on its own, and it made the big guy flail around and spurt some nasty stuff out at the end of his torso.
Oh my god.
Which, at least it proved he was alive, despite the whole not really breathing thing. Also, Doc put more fluid back in and sealed off most of the leaky, exposed torso area.
Right.
So it was probably a net gain for Gravis. We all watched him running around and yelling at Tink, who was stuck with the literal ass end of the job. While the sound of the oncoming orcs grew steadily louder, it came as an immense relief when the shuttle dropped out of the clouds, and you better believe we were lined up and ready to board before it hit the ground. The pilot wasn't exactly on the same page as the rest of us, though. He didn't stay in his seat to keep the engines spun up.
Right.
Instead, he was standing at the rear hatch when it opened. None of us had actually seen the pilot on our flight in, and that first meeting was rather unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
He was a scout marine and looked nearly identical to the other guy.
Oh.
Except for not being impaled and dissolving.
Right.
He was also considerably worse at the whole stoicism thing. The pilot stood in our way and demanded to know what had happened to Sergeant Gravis and Rubrum, which was...
What does it look like happened to them?
Sort of awkward since none of us had actually bothered to learn the dead Scout Marine's name. Anyway, the pilot did not take his sergeant's bisection well, and nearly went berserk when he saw his buddy's rifle sticking out of Nubby's pack. The outermost mines were going off at this point, and none of us wanted to die on the landing pad, so Sarge acted rather cruelly. He yanked the Legiamen Balifiel Savage out of Nubby's pack, thrust it into the pilot's arms, said the scout had wanted him to have it, and then pointed out that his boss was going to die if we don't take off right now.
Right.
We didn't have any problem securing
Like, Space Marines, guys. Space Marines.
the Zoanthrope for takeoff. The snaky Xenos was still completely out of it and fit right into one of the oversized seats.
Yay.
Gravis
Strap
was
it
a
in.
bit of a problem, though. Doc wound up strapping him upside down in one of the seats, supposedly because it let him tighten the crash harness, and would keep everything from falling out if the bandage gave way.
Oh my god.
None of us knew enough to argue, so we went with the same gross end up theory for his lower half, which was put into the seat next to him. During these...
This poor bastard. This poor bastard. Oh, we will refurbish you. We'll make you better than before.
strapping in process, Gravis's sword, bolter, and other little weapons and gadgets disappeared into Nubby's backpack. Thankfully, the pilot was too busy taking off and dodging small arms fire from the incoming orc to see any of this. After we were out of the orc's range, our ascent out of the atmosphere went comfortably enough. Sarge sat in the relative peacefulness and inspected us troops. In addition to his ample supply of lacerations and electrical burns, we'd collected a concussion, a fairly nasty leg wound, a broken nose, some cracked ribs, nearly a dozen minor flesh borer hits, and an orc juice marinade. We were all still alive, though, and we had the Oak's Zoanthrope too.
Yay!
So all in all, we called it a win.
Yay!
Sure, our Space Marines had taken one hell of a beating, but we'd completed our objective, and horrible sacrifices in the name of victory are what Space Marines are all about. I mean, we'd been attacked by a bloody hive tyrant.
Right.
And 2 Marines for a tyrant is a pretty good trade. Anyway, it was beginning to look like Gravis might just survive long enough to get him to a real Medicae.
Yay!
So yeah, totally a win. We were in the middle of congratulating ourselves and speculating on if Gravis would be put in a dreadnought when 3 things happened. First, the zoanthrope started twitching. Then Gravis's armor started beeping and his lower half began to smoke. And finally, the helmet in Sarge's lap began talking. So no shit, there we were.
Oh my god. Dark Innovator says, now I have the image in my head of the scout walking past the 2 halves, then slowly backstepping with a tilted head and disbelieving expression. Accurate. Oh my god. Blood Raven Marine upon seeing Nubby. Lock the reliquary. Accurate. Let's go, part 7.
Sneaking across a war zone with a slowly awakening Tyranid psyker
Which is
and a
bad.
quickly dying Space Marine.
That's even
When
worse.
Sergeant Rebus called for his evac. If you actually needed proof that the entire purpose of the universe is to shit on poor hardworking guardsmen, it'd be damned hard to find something better than that timing right there. I mean, just to remind you, this wasn't some simple pickup from a combat zone he needed.
Right.
No. He needed us to sneak back into boarding range of a Tyranid hive ship.
Right.
Which was still being assaulted by a few million orc fighters.
Right.
To pick him up before the high-yield vortex bomb he'd just planted went off. You could say that we weren't the ones doing the actual sneaking, and that we'd been safely through it before, without the armed vortex bomb, of course.
Right.
But this time, it would be a race against the zoanthrope waking up,
Right.
and Sergeant Gravis melting. Every man has their limit, and this was well beyond ours. Before the pilot could respond, Sarge put on Gravis's helmet and calmly, clearly, told the Space Marine to wait his damned turn. All of us, except for Doc, who was rather busy, cheered. Sergeant Rebus and the pilot were less enthusiastic. The argument that followed included accusations of cowardice, the pilot coming out of the cockpit with a bolter and threatening to kill either us or the zoanthrope, and Sarge telling one of the Emperor's Angels of Death to shut up and soldier.
Oh god, no.
In the end, a combination of devotion to the mission and desire to save his sergeant won the pilot to our side.
Right.
Sergeant Rebus was instructed to delay the bomb's detonation and hold out until we were dropped off and a return trip could be made. The conversation ended with Rebus bitterly complaining that dying waiting for evac was an end worthy of a guardsman. Sarge responded by telling him that holding the line wasn't that hard. After all, us guardsmen did it all the time. Now it might sound like we callously doomed a team.
You're never getting promoted. As a Space Marine, you're never getting promoted because you have been roasted by a Guardsman sergeant.
Team of valiant Space Marines to their deaths. But we really weren't delaying their extraction that long. The Marines had prepared for this type of situation when they'd adjusted their mission plan to account for only having one shuttle. The Occurrence Border had followed our stealthy little vessel into the system as quietly as it could, and was now close enough that it'd be a matter of minutes, not...
Nick, thank you, Nick. Nick says, don't forget the Space Marine habit of not telling their allies important information or dismissing the mortals' ideas. This Space Marine sergeant is gonna, if he lives, is gonna be a sergeant forever. Because getting roasted that hard by a guardsman... Yeah. I did not, yeah, Hobbit, I did not think we would see a roast fest between a Guardsman and a Marine, where the Guardsman won. Thank you, Nick. I really do appreciate it, bud. This is ridiculous.
Not hours to reach it. Of course, being that close meant there was a significant risk of detection.
Right.
And the occurrence border did not have any real way to hold off an attack by the Orcs or the Nids.
No.
Back at the briefing, Rebus had claimed it was an acceptable risk, though, which goes to show you what a bloody tactical genius he was. Okay, maybe that's a little unfair. Having the ship closer turned out to be very good for him, and it's not like he could have...
Master Mistake says, don't forget, it's all going to be in reports. There's a commissar somewhere that is literally going to try to kick a Space Marine in the jewels to out-zeal and out-show what Sarge did here.
Foreseen that we'd capture the Zoanthrope, but forget to bring along that second dose of that special psych tranquilizer stuff. Though if he's spared the blame, then that means Gravis and his...
Mr. Reich, I think that is another sergeant on board. That's not the scout that's piloting. He's not arguing with the scout that's piloting. He's arguing with the sergeant that planted the vortex bomb. Thank you, Slacker. That Legion of Sigismund's from the Gene Seed idea. There will be very little that could actually be a legitimate threat to that level of ability. I could just imagine Abaddon lands on Cadia. And then all of a sudden a whole bunch of portals start opening and a whole bunch of Sigismund start going through. Kind of like the goddamn thing from Avengers Endgame. And then all of a sudden Fulgrim lands beside Abaddon only to have Rylendor show up beside Sigismund. Yeah. I can dream. I can honestly dream. Yeah, Sigismund's a symbol. Anyhow, thank you, Slacker. Hobbit, thank you, Hobbit. If Sarge isn't an Inquisitor after all this, that is the most balls. Like, that takes balls.
His scout deserve a little for not taking
Slacker.
the excessively simple precaution of leaving a few spare doses in the shuttle.
Oh, lovely.
I mean, we were going into extremely hostile territory. Why was the scout carrying all the tranks? And why hadn't either of them told us a second dose would be needed? Is Tyranid wrangling some super-secret Emperor's Scythes-only technique? Or did they think that there was no way that we'd survive and continue the mission if they didn't?
Part 2. That's what happened.
Well, actually that one is completely understandable. Arrogant as hell, but understandable. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. The Zoanthrope was a problem later. At the time, our big concern was that half of Gravis was dying and the other half was violently decomposing. Once again, the task was divided between Doc and Tink. This time, Doc was much calmer, and his response was surprisingly reasonable and professional. He fussed around the upside-down Space Marine torso with his medical scanner and tox wands, and shouted questions about Astartes biology and power armor automated Medicae systems at the pilot. There was some rather confusing talk about illicit kidneys, biomedical cogitators, and cellular regenerator reservoirs, which the rest of us ignored, because Tink's part of the job was a complete shit show. Whatever was on the Flyrant sword, when it got going, it really got going. Gravis's lower half went from fine to melting from the wound down in mere seconds.
Oh, lovely.
It's hard to say whether Tink's response was the best or worst one available, but it was certainly the most disgusting.
Nice.
In an effort to slow down the process, he unbuckled the power-armored legs and flipped them upside down. The smoldering bandage immediately gave way and dumped a horrible combination of meat juice, Xenos toxins, and extremely powerful acid onto the seat. The smell was beyond vile, and all of us had to put on our rebreathers just to stay conscious. which was lucky considering how many airborne toxins were found in that shuttle when we landed.
Lovely.
So after the spillage started dissolving the seat, the rest of us became very interested in helping Tink. Of course, none of us knew jack shit about biochemistry,
Right.
so we were only able to offer what might be called mechanical solutions to the acid problem. And most of those suggestions were absolutely terrible. In the end, we settled on the traditional occurrence border technique of shoving it out the airlock and hoping it needed oxygen and heat to keep doing whatever.
Right.
So that's why, when we finally docked with the occurrence border, our shuttle hull was decorated by a pair of legs being gripped by Spot the Wonder Drone. It says something that none...
Mr. Reg asks, is there any space marine you think could actually threaten a Primarch? No, not really. Or Custodes? Depends on the Primarch. Easiest Primarch to beat in a melee fight in the days of the Heresy was Lorgar. So, I think Sigismund would have embarrassed Lorgar quite considerably, but he wouldn't have been able to kill him.
One of the people waiting in the bay even commented on that. The occurrence border had been warned of the time-sensitive nature of our cargo, and the welcoming party was well prepared. Doc's hospitalier girlfriend and her minions were ready with a bunch of scary-looking medical gear.
Yay!
And sort of big goo-filled container. Gravis's legs and, to Tink's horror, Spot were immediately pried off the hull, crammed into said giant pickle jar, and hauled off before we'd even made it out of the shuttle. Doc was the first one down the ramp. With Tink's help, he deposited Gravis on a waiting gurney, then turned to his girlfriend and went for a hug and a quick kiss. He didn't get either. Instead, she screamed at him to keep his rebreather on, hosed him with a chemical sprayer, and then ordered him to go through a full decontamination and meet her in the med bay. Doc stood there and dripped for a second, and then dejectedly jogged after his departing girlfriend. Those of us who weren't struggling to get the zoanthrope out of the shuttle chuckled at this. At least, until a pair of sprayer-armed minions started hosing us as well. We'd all been thoroughly soaked by the time we got the zoanthrope out of its seat and loaded onto the cargo trolley Hannah had waiting for us.
Social...
The sprayers then...
Bloody Magpie! Excellent chat for Bloody Magpie. Social distancing. I love it.
And moved on to hosing the shuttle's interior, but before they could get much done, the rear hatch slammed shut and the engines kicked back on. In clear violation of all safety procedures, the pilot rocketed out of the bay before we'd cleared the area. As he left, the pilot calmed us and promised vengeance if Gravis didn't survive. And from...
What the fuck? He got cut in half by a hive tyrant. What do you want from the fucking guardsmen, you dipshit? Like, what are they gonna do? Jump in the way? That's fucking stupid.
From the helmet Sarge was still carrying, we overheard him giving his ETA to Sergeant Rebus. We silently wished him luck, then turned to the serious business of getting our zoanthropes stored in the psyker containment cells. The zoanthrope hadn't been any trouble during the unloading process. That was because it had come almost fully awake while we were still 10 minutes out,
That's bad.
and we'd had to do something about it. Initially, we'd hoped that this far away from other Tyranids and the hive ship, it'd revert to being a dumb beast.
Nope.
Acting on this theory, when the zoanthrope started clawing at its straps and manifesting small bolts of electricity, Sarge attempted to establish superiority by punching it in the snout. That did not work. Plan B was to hit it with one of the guard-issue trank and painkiller syrets from Doc's kit. It's not like he was using them anyway.
Right.
When that didn't work, we went with Plan C.
Right.
Which was to keep applying plans A and B until they did work. After a fair amount of punching and enough tranks to kill 3 men, the uppity Xenos Psyker finally went back to sleep. Disturbingly, though,
They have refurbished Doc's tranks.
The shuttle was still filled with little snaps of static, and we all felt a sort of ominous pressure in the air. We tried to call the xenologist adept back on the ship and get his opinion on that, but our comms had a surprising amount of trouble, so we settled on asking him to meet us in the bay. The adept was waiting next to Hannah, and as we loaded the zoanthrope onto the pallet, he took note of the minor phenomena as well as the empty syrettes that we'd left sticking in the Xenos. After processing this for a second, he began yelling at us to go faster, which was immensely unhelpful, since we were all out running him until he got on the pallet himself. The part where he called ahead to warn the psyker cells and ask Fumbles to meet us halfway was more useful though, so we forgave him. Picture, if you will, a cargo pallet racing down the corridors of a spaceship. It is occupied by a large unconscious Xenos that looks like a cross between a snake and a fetus, a slightly overweight man in robes, and a guardsman with an injured leg.
Right.
The guardsman is holding a wrench that is connected to a random tangle of wires which has been hung over the Xenos. As the pallet races along, he is using the wrench to ground increasingly large bursts of inexplicably green electricity against the floor and walls. Behind the pallet are a terrified-looking tech priestess and a burly guardsman who looks like he'd recently crawled through a burning razor blade factory. Both of them are pushing the pallet as fast as they can through the maze-like series of corridors that make up the ship. Every twist and turn requires a frantic effort to change the heavy pallet's direction, and occasionally, one of the pushers will misjudge, slam into a wall or door frame, and then have to scramble to catch back up. A fair distance ahead of the pallet are two guardsmen. One is wiry and wreathed with explosives.
Nice.
The other is short and lugging a backpack near to bursting. They are screaming at people to get out of the corridors, applying indiscriminate force when necessary, and opening the various doors and hatches the pallet needs to go through. A little bit behind them is a guardswoman who could be defined as regal-looking if she wasn't completely filth-encrusted.
Nice.
She is pausing at corners and relaying upcoming direction changes to the pallet's pushers. So this parade of panic made its way through nearly half a kilometer of ship's corridors, trailing confusion and technical failures behind it. But it didn't really get bad until right at the halfway point.
Yay!
When Fumbles suddenly stepped out of a side hatch and into the path of the onrushing pallet. A second later, he was face down on top of the zoanthrope, clutching his badly bruised shins and screaming at the top of his lungs.
Oh.
Not being a psyker, I can't really say what Fumbles did during that mad scramble. From our perspective, he just sort of laid there and gibbered. And later on, he claimed not to remember any of it.
Yay!
He was probably doing something really important, like keeping the zoanthrope from doing stuff while it was unconscious, or hiding us from the hive mind. Chances are that without him doing his thing, we would have died horribly before we got to the holding cells.
Right.
We didn't really appreciate that at the time, though. All we noticed was how immensely inconvenient Fumbles made the rest of the journey.
Failures is dead! Again! And Ronnie says he's still geeking about the Hold the Line Space Marine. Guards do it all the time. He says it's the greatest roast since the world eater let Latara shot in the face. Yes.
After Fumbles arrived, in addition to the electricity thrown off by the sleeping zoanthrope, we had to deal with...
Now I'm trying to think of that one's name. It wasn't Viserys. Was it Viserys? I can't remember.
With freak indoor snowstorms, a few instances of spontaneous gravity reversal,
Yay!
and all sorts of creepy noises and visions. On 2 occasions, the effects were so bad that Sarge considered dumping the accident-prone psyker off the pallet and leaving him behind. But the xenologist adept insisted that he stay. Luckily, Hannah's augmetics didn't take that long to start working again after they spontaneously locked up, and the minor demon only made it 3 steps before a combination of pulse fire and what might be called a power wrench turned it into chunky salsa. Despite
Thank you, Slacker. Slacker says Delvaris, the World Eater captain's name that Latara Sauron shot in the face was Delvaris. That was one of the most glorious moments in the entirety of the Horus Heresy saga. It was glorious. Thank you, Slacker, for both. The name, thank you, appreciate it.
despite all the complications, we made incredibly good time on our mad sprint.
And just because, Mordric lives.
Covering something like a kilometer in just under 6 minutes. That wasn't quite fast enough, though. We'd reached the final stretch and could see Jim holding the door open, when the ominous sort of psychic pressure we'd been feeling suddenly ratcheted up.
Yay!
As the pressure mounted, Fumbles gibbered something like, "It sees, it knows, it hungers," and the entire corridor filled with a torrential downpour of blood.
That's bad.
Everything slowed to a crawl as the first drop of blood hit Sarge's face. Memories of 2 psychers in a cargo bay flitted through his mind,
That sounds like a porno, just saying.
and he slowly began to reach towards Fumbles. Then everything exploded.
That's bad.
There were actually 2 explosions.
Okay.
The first was a sort of psychic concussion. For a second, the rain of blood paused in midair. Then there was a crack of energy, and a wave of force radiated out from Fumbles. It was strongest at its epicenter,
Yay!
and all 3 of the pallet's human passengers were thrown off. Tink and the Adept both slammed into the corridor's walls while Fumbles flew upwards. Inexplicably struck to the ceiling for a second.
Everybody X in the chat to nuke Mr. Reich for that. I did. Yes, you deserve it, Mr. Reich. You deserve it. Oh God, that. Do not look up any variation of that on Google. Don't.
Then flopped to the floor with an unpleasant splash. Behind the pallet, Sarge saw the wave coming and rather gallantly pushed Hannah behind him. This did not have the intended result. The wave hit Sarge, and over 100 kilos of psychically propelled non-com slammed into Hannah. This in turn resulted in both of them tumbling backwards and landing in a heap, unfortunately with Sarge on top, nearly crushing the poor cog girl. He probably would have died of embarrassment if it weren't for the fact that all 5 human projectiles were left unconscious by the blast.
Oh, that's not good.
The final effect of the psychic concussion was to blow out all the lights in the corridor.
F in the chat to nuke Hobbit.
Twitch, Nubby, and Amy activated their shoulder-mounted lights and watched through the rain of blood as the pallet sloshed to a halt. The 3 of them held position and kept their weapons trained on the zoanthrope until Jim shouted Hannah's name and began to run past them. Nubby casually stuck out a foot and tripped the panicked cogboy, then followed Amy and Twitch as they began to move towards the pallet. Their cautious advance had nearly reached the pallet when the zoanthrope suddenly jerked into the air.
Oh, that's a bad sign.
It hung there for a second, like some sort of horrible giant puppet being held up by tangled strings. Then a second explosion shook the entire ship, the world went green, and Amy started screaming. It was a bit of a surprise to find ourselves alive after that. Nubby and Twitch stood there in the ankle-deep blood, shielding their eyes against the bright green light and watching Amy, who was screaming and wildly firing her pulse rifle at the zoanthrope's glowing energy shield.
Oh, good lord. Yeah, we're right about that. Okay, we need to refurbish a couple of cyclonic torpedoes. So, R to refurbish this. Oh, God. R to refurbish a cyclonic torpedo and use it on Hobbit. Go.
Guardsmen that they were, both of them quickly raised their own weapons and started firing as well. But after a few seconds, they noticed that something was weird. The zoanthrope wasn't fighting back. There were no lightning bolts or soul-rending screeches,
Right.
and on closer inspection, it didn't even appear to be awake. Of course, it wasn't until Theo came out of where he'd been hiding in the cells, helped Jim to his feet, and asked whether the plan was still to capture the zoanthrope alive, that they considered not shooting the Xenos. Everyone except Amy, who was too busy hysterically shooting at the zoanthrope to talk, put their heads together to figure out what to do. While the zoanthrope may not have been attacking, the psychic pressure had gone from ominous to outright painful, so the debate was a very short one. The second a halfway reasonable suggestion was put forward, they all leapt into action, though Twitch and Nubby both bitterly complained that it was the non-human who made the plan. Well, plan is a grandiose term. They wanted to get the zoanthrope into the cells, but no one wanted to touch the sparking green shield.
Get a rope!
So Theo had made the stereotypically Tau suggestion of using drones. He had Jim send a small swarm of servo skulls and kludged together Tau drones behind the zoanthrope, and had them start ramming its shield in an attempt to herd it towards the door. Nubby and Twitch contributed by getting Amy to stop shooting and make sure no one was drowning in the warp blood.
Right, that's a good idea.
The plan was decent, but had a major problem.
Alright. Look. This is not going well. So we're gonna have to exterminate the chat. And sorry guys, it's just what we gotta do. If you finish refurbishing your R keys, please use them. We must exterminate this entire chat. And Mr. Reich, this is all your fault.
It was too slow. The skulls and drones didn't have that much pushing power to begin with, and the electrical nature of the zoanthrope's shield was frying them one by one. It was a race against the psychic pressure mounting to lethal levels, and we were losing. None of us had any other ideas, though, and things probably would have gone poorly if Amy hadn't snapped out of her PTSD-inspired violent freakout. When Amy returned to coherence, she took one look at how slow it was going, cussed everyone else out for being useless sissies, and seized the forgotten cargo pallet. She ran towards the zoanthrope, building up as much speed as the blood allowed, and at the last second levered the pallet onto two wheels and used it as a sort of poorly balanced battering ram. It worked surprisingly well.
Nice!
With Nubby and Twitch's help, another two blows got the zoanthrope to the door of the psyker containment cells, where the problem of how to fit a 3-meter energy bubble through a 2-meter wide door presented itself.
This is a problem, typically.
This was solved by the arrival of Sergeant Tink, who'd finally finished their naps and decided it was time to be actually useful. While Jim and Theo, who weren't quite as stubborn as us guardsmen, argued over whether it was possible to widen the door without damaging something or other, we backed to the end of the corridor. We picked the pallet up like a more traditional battering ram, Sarge positioned himself at the end, and then we charged. Jim and Theo's debate was brought to a halt as a wildly sparking Xenopsyker shot between them, bounced off a few pieces of delicate machinery, and neatly slid into the waiting stasis unit.
Nice!
The techies slapped various on buttons, and then the terrible psychic pressure vanished. Out in the corridor, those of us who hadn't broken anything cheered, but our enthusiasm dwindled as every comm terminal in the cells began ringing.
Yay!
Jim checked the caller out.
Okay. I have got to step away from it. If you've noticed, I've been grimacing a little bit. I got to put something in my ears to kind of like numb this. I don't know why this has been going on for so long, but I will be back in less than 2-3 minutes. Thank you, Nick. He says it has been an honor, boss, for the Emperor. I'll be back in a few minutes, guys. It won't take me that long. Oh, oh my God. That's gonna be a meme now. All right. Coming back, sitting down. Yay. And, yay. Okay. So, we are on episode 8 of Tyranid Acquisition Experts. It is currently going horrible in the chat. There hasn't been a train for a while. Yes, you are right, Slacker. Let's see. I took a step away for a few seconds. I had to put an eardrop in my... Like, I'm having all kinds of problems right now with especially my right ear. It's been going on for about 2 weeks now, and it's just a constant pain. I did go to the hospital. I got myself some antibiotics. I'm using those. At the same time, I'm using these others to kind of numb the pain, and they wore off in the time that, I was basically sitting here for the premiere, and now they've kind of worn off. So I had to go refurbish my eardrops. Diclonia. Let's see. Hold on a second. That's why the Kriegman isn't here. The train is broken down. The Kriegsman isn't here, and that makes me sad. These things are kicking in. I hope they kick in soon because this is painful. Diclonius. Diclonius says to Hobbit, "Oh, like you have any right to talk to anyone about heresy." And Mr. Reich, I have had these thrice blessed, so they should be working pretty soon. I have been getting like pounded by Nurgle, and it's not funny. It just sucks. Arnoux says I should refurbish my ears. Well, if you've noticed, I've been pulling these off every once in a while. Just because. Ronnie says, this is why you shouldn't talk to Strider. I mean, Armand, he puts spells to hurt your ears. Alright, let's go. Part 8. And the good thing about Part 8 is when I went to go get that, I went and got myself another bit of wake-up juice. There we go. Let's go. Here we go.
ID on one of the terminals, saw that it was the...
I gotta rewind that.
Jim checked the caller ID on one of the terminals, saw that it was the captain, and decided that this was our problem. Well, he said it was our problem, but everyone really knew it was Sarge's.
Right.
Chain of command goes both ways and all that. So we hauled our too exhausted to be fearless leader off the ground, relocated his shoulder, and pushed him towards the nearest comm terminal.
Oh, glorious.
He stared at the thing reproachfully for several seconds, swore a bit to make himself feel better, then finally bit the bullet and grabbed the handset.
Yay! Let's go.
All of us listened in as Sarge answered the call, both because we were curious and because the captain was yelling so loud that it was impossible for us not to. The man in charge of flying us through the void, who sounded both furious and terrified, had a few questions for us.
Okay.
Specifically, what in the Emperor's name we'd done, why his navigator was hysterical, why his astropath was dead, and why 2 hive ships were heading towards us. Let me tell you, nothing ruins the taste of victory quite as thoroughly as hearing about how much collateral damage there was. Anyway, Sarge dealt with the captain by holding the handset out at arm's length and waiting for the man to run out of breath. When his chance came, Sarge told the captain we had the cargo secure, then promised to come up to the bridge.
Right.
While he did that, the rest of us wearily speculated on just how screwed we were, and collected our teammates from the blood-filled corner.
Right.
Fumbles was alive, but completely out of it. And there was something off in his eyes. You know, aside from being all rolled back.
Right.
It was quickly decided that he needed a trip to the medbay, as did Hannah and the Adept. Despite being in better shape than Fumbles, both of them were obviously in a fair amount of pain from their various dents and bruises.
The Slaneshi fiend says, dude, where's my Tyranid?
The less callous members of the squad felt a little guilty about that. Sometimes it's easy to forget that even the weediest guardsman is a great deal tougher than most folks. So as I said, Sarge finished the call with a promise to come up to the bridge, which led to a near mutiny from the rest of us. It says something about our level of exhaustion that we found the prospect of yet another damned hike more distressing than the incoming hive ships. Since he was far too tired himself to force us all to come with him, and because there was some other stuff that needed doing anyway, everyone but Amy, who turned out to be terrible at rock, paper, scissors, was excused from the trek.
Nice.
Nubby and Twitch were tasked with taking Fumbles, the Adept, and Hannah to the medbay on the massively dented cargo pallet. Tink wanted to join the medbay group, both to get patched up and to retrieve Spot, but Jim and Theo needed his help with something technical sounding, so he had to stay. Hannah wound up promising to save his drone from whatever horrible medical things were being done to it, and to send it down with whoever was going to clean up the giant warp blood puddle.
Yay.
Sarge and Amy arrived on the bridge, where they were surprised to discover that they were not the only ones covered with blood. The communications officer's front side had a nice coating of red, with a few white and gray chunks mixed in. It turned out that when the captain said the astropath was dead, he meant
Really dead.
Really dead.
Oh.
Anyway, the captain was up on his podium doing captain-y things.
So the astropath did a weird boy.
When he saw Sergeant Amy, he paused from yelling at people and spared all of 10 seconds to tell Sarge that we were now 3 hive ships incoming.
Oh, lovely.
He had absolutely no intention of letting them get into firing range, and we'd be leaving just as soon as the warp drive finished warming up. After that, Sarge would explain just what us dirt suckers had done to the ship.
Death the Kid says, refurbished astropath? Well, now it's fertilizer.
As the captain went back to yelling at subordinates, Sarge digested the new information. After a few seconds, Amy realized he was stuck and performed the single duty she'd been brought along for.
Okay.
Which is to say, she jabbed Sarge in the ribs and reminded him to ask about the Space Marines. While Sarge stepped up onto the podium with the captain, Amy, her important work completed, commandeered a comfy-looking chair from a terrified ensign.
Hobbit, you are not allowed anymore for the next at least 2 streams to declare anybody guilty of any sort of heresy. At all. Just not happening.
She fended off all attempts to remove her with a combination of obscenity, death threats, and some totally justified violence. The discussion on the podium quickly became an argument, albeit a quiet one. Sarge was not happy to hear that the Space Marines were not aboard, or that the captain had no intention of waiting for them.
Hobbit, you are now prophet! What have you done to us?
The captain was not happy with Sarge's complete lack of understanding when it came to the realities of naval warfare. Sarge made nearly a dozen...
Phaelius, go get Asmodai. We must make him repent. Of course it can still get worse, Mordek. Of course this can still get worse.
Suggestions as to how time could be bought. The captain, using the same sort of condescending tone we used when talking about basic squad tactics to adepts and such, explained why every single one was either unwise, idiotic, or downright impossible. In the end, Sarge was forced to accept that unless the Space Marines made it back on their own, or at least started answering their vox, they were going to be left behind. He dejectedly left the captain to his business and wandered over to the brain-spattered communications officer.
Yeah, poor bastard.
Out of a morbid sense of duty, and despite the fact that all of this information had already been broadcast to the Space Marines, Sarge had the officer direct the Vox array towards the hive ship that Rebus had boarded, and then began explaining the situation. This rather bleak message got no response, which indicated the Marines were still too close to the hive ship to break Vox silence, or, as Amy unhelpfully suggested, they were already dead.
I do think that we should get together the vat of the Holy Recaf and douse Hobbit and Monster while chanting the litanies of banishment to cast out whatever foul creature of the warp has possessed him for this.
After a few minutes, Sarge's transmissions dissolved into awkward apologies for abandoning the Space Marines to their deaths. Eventually, it grew so pathetic that Amy forced Sarge to hang up the Vox and stop embarrassing himself. A second ensign was evicted from his chair, and both of them sat and watched the bridge's tactical display as the countdown to warp slowly continued. It was an incredibly depressing scene, but Sarge felt he needed to stay until the end, and Amy was similarly bound to keep Sarge company. Sarge moped. Amy flicked pieces of orc at the 2 tech priests on the bridge. The captain captained, and the rest of the bridge officers ran around doing stuff like redirecting void shields. Then at warp minus 60, everyone flinched as the psychic equivalent of millions of nails running down a massive chalkboard swept over them.
Oh.
Luckily, the bridge's windows had already been covered in preparation for entering the warp, so no one was driven insane by the sight of a massive hole in reality forming and sucking an entire Tyranid hive ship, not to mention a few thousand orc fighters, into the warp.
Vortex bomb.
In the confusion of prayers and curses that followed, Sarge noticed the Vox station chiming. Sarge nearly strangled the communications officer as he yanked the praying man up from the floor and back into his seat. After a few seconds of button pressing from the officer and unhelpful yelling from Sarge, the Vox station spat out a piece of paper.
Okay.
Sarge snatched the paper and scanned the 3 lines of text on it. The only one that made sense was, "Do not let us be forgotten, Sergeant Rebus." But that was enough for Sarge. He ran to the captain and thrust the paper into his hands. Sarge was halfway through triumphantly telling the captain that the Marines were alive and probably just need a small amount of time to dock, when the captain shrugged and handed the paper back. Amy had to restrain Sarge as the captain told all hands to brace and began the final countdown to warp. 10 seconds later, the most violent warp transit either Sarge or Amy had experienced knocked them both to the ground. Over in the medbay, Twitch and Nubby had to hold Fumbles down while he suffered a massive seizure, and Doc had the poor fortune to vomit while wearing a surgical mask. Down in the psycher holding cells, Tink was knocked on his ass as a few overstressed pieces of equipment went rapid, unplanned disassembly. As Jim hauled him back up, Theo poked his head out and asked if there had been a warp jump, because the psychic pressure of the hive mind wasn't decreasing. The ensuing argument over whether Theo actually knew how to read the exterior psychic activity display was interrupted by a bolt of green lightning.
Yay!
Back on the bridge, the captain explained that the first 2 lines of the Space Marine's message had consisted of an astropathic contact code and an orbital vector. The code would probably reach some Emperor's Scythe's battle barge, and with the vector they'd be able to jump in and pick up their stranded battle brothers. It'd probably take a few months, but Marines were supposed to be very patient about that sort of thing. Sarge accepted this without argument, mostly because he was too tired to get back up. Unfortunately, Sarge wasn't allowed to just go to sleep on the floor of the bridge. It wasn't that the captain or any of the other bridge officers objected. After the explanation, he'd become preoccupied with some unexpected hive ship-shaped blip on the scanners.
Right.
Instead, the problem was a very annoying voice on his comm bead. Tink, who was talking with the speed of someone that had just been dosed with stim, had a few questions about just what the hell was going on. Sarge was forced to get up off the comfortable floor and explain that the very big spike of warp energy had been the vortex bomb.
Right.
No one had known the jump would be that bad, and the hive mind's continued presence probably had something to do with the remains of the vortexed hive ship floating next to us in the warp.
Oh, God.
There was a bit of chatter in the background that sounded like, "Told you so," but Tink was too hyped up to actually listen to the answers. Halfway through Sarge's explanation, Tink started a high-speed tirade about how delicate and complex every piece of equipment in the cells was, how much that equipment had been damaged during the Zoanthrope's imprisonment, and how important it was that he be told about things before they happened.
Really, Tink?
Tink's irate rambling was finally brought to a halt by the sound of a lightning bolt and some incredibly girly screaming in the background, followed by Jim ripping the comm bead off Tink's head and screaming, "The Zoanthrope is awake!"
Yay!
into it. According to Amy, Sarge didn't start crying when he realized the mission wasn't over yet, but it was a close thing. His despair didn't last long, though. Within seconds, he was barking a sitrep out of Tink and had Amy relaying orders to the rest of us. In summary, the stasis unit was on the fritz. The warp presence shroud and exterior psi shielding were being steadily torn apart by the hive mind's continued assaults. The psi suppressor was currently on fire, and the Zoanthrope was awake.
Oh, this is bad.
The end result was that the captive Xenos was shooting half-strength lightning bolts every time the stasis field flickered, and everything was seconds away from spontaneously exploding.
This is bad.
The situation was bad, but not quite as bad as Jim had made it sound.
Okay.
Tink was sure that he could fix everything. All he needed was old Bill, Hannah, every available tech priest,
Right.
a whole lot of parts, and some idiots to stand in front of the lightning bolts to be sent down to the psyker holding cells. Also Doc, or someone better at medicine than Doc, because Tink couldn't feel his leg anymore, and Jim's fleshy bits were a little crispy.
Yeah, but
Oh, and
do
recap.
we really care about Tink all that much?
Lots and lots of recap.
Yes.
It took a lot of yelling, and a bit of theft. Not to mention at
It wouldn't be a proper inquisitorial mission unless they had a lot of recap.
least 2 outright abductions to put together the relief force. But we managed it. What followed was an absolutely heroic repair effort by the techies, plus a fair bit of general assistance from the rest of us. Which is to say that in addition to playing Gopher, we took turns holding a grounded boarding shield in front of the zoanthrope, and shooting the small demonic forms that occasionally rose out of the blood pool in the hallway. Finally, after several hours of frantic labor, and what we were later informed was a similarly frantic retreat from the mangled but still living remains of the hive ship, the occurrence border dropped back out of the warp, and the situation in the cells stabilized. We declared victory, and went the fuck to sleep. Now I say we declared victory, but that was more in the tactical sense than the strategic. We'd reached a sort of temporary calm spot, but all of us knew it wasn't going to last. We'd captured the zoanthrope and repaired its prison to a sort of minimally functional level, but we still had to haul it across an entire segmentum.
Guys, Slacker bought himself a Baneblade. His paint supplies just came in. It is a Baneblade in chat for that.
That meant months of warp travel, which, given the notorious unworthiness of our ship,
It is the Baneblade! That actually hurt my ears.
was quite dangerous enough without the imprisoned Xenos Psyker. None of us were optimistic enough to think that we'd make it through the whole thing without incident. And I won't go into what the more pessimistic members of the squad predicted. Once we'd all gotten some much-needed sleep and medical treatment, a long and incredibly tedious post-mission meeting was held.
Frank, I hope, I've been through that. I hope you're okay, bud. Check and make sure that you're okay, definitely, and let me know, alright?
All of us attended, but after the initial part where we regaled everyone with our heroic exploits, people started finding excuses to leave. These ranged from legitimate concerns about projects and patience, to Nubby's dubious mumbling about having left his felid in the oven.
What?
To Amy just walking out. But eventually everyone but Sarge and Jim escaped. In the end, it was just them, the captain, the adepts, and a few of the ship's officers, planning out the whole mad voyage, while the rest of us slouched around the medbay. Our continuous presence in the medbay wasn't really appreciated. The hospitalier didn't really mind us, but our minions made several pointed comments about how nice it would be if some of us, specifically Nubby and Twitch, went back to our quarters. We ignored them, though. It's not like we didn't appreciate our quarters, we just wanted to stick together, and both Doc and Fumbles were more or less stuck in the medbay.
Right.
Luckily, Doc wasn't stuck in the medbay because he'd been badly hurt. His girlfriend might have done horrible medical things to us if he'd been nearly crippled again. In fact, Doc was doing better than the rest of us were. Primarily because he'd missed out on that shit show in the cells. Sergeant Gravis was in pretty bad shape, though, and most of Doc's time was taken up with his treatment. While the bisected Space Marine's condition had improved slightly when he'd been moved to the much better stocked and staffed medbay, that had only been temporary.
Right.
There was some sort of complex chemical war going on between the Tyranid toxins and Gravis's weird Space Marine biology. Doc's girlfriend had hooked up a medical cogitator to some sort of socket in Gravis's power armor, and Doc was constantly either injecting or extracting fluids from the comatose Astartes based on what it said. It was remarkably unpleasant to watch, and the rest of us found it amazing how persistent Doc was about the whole thing. Honestly, the rest of us, including the Hospitalier, mind you, were in favor of just letting the Space Marine die after the second day of horrible medical torture.
Wow.
But Doc seemed committed to keeping Gravis alive for as long as possible. We left him to it, both because it was far too gross to keep watching, and because Fumbles needed our company more than Doc. Fumbles was in the mid.
Adrian, like Hobbit said, he's cut in half. How could he be in good shape? Adrian said in half shape, maybe.
For what you might call personal reasons. He'd come out of his personal battle with the Zoanthrope, or the Hive Mind, or whatever, different.
Oh boy.
Mentally, he was okay. I mean, he was still a bit neurotic and starved for praise as ever. And he still uncontrollably broadcast his emotions to everyone nearby.
Right.
But aside from that, and not remembering anything about the fight, he was fine. The problem was his eyes. At first, they just looked odd, and he was mostly blind. But over the few days we rested in normal space, they sort of grew and changed.
That's not a good sign.
Now, none of us wanted to use the M word, even if he was a psyker to begin with. But that was the sort of stuff you were supposed to tell the commissar about. I mean, his eyes got to the size of a bloody fist. Well, maybe not Sarge's fist, but definitely as big as one of Doc's girly hands. Anyway, that wasn't all. His pupils got all weird, too. At their smallest, they were about as wide around as your finger. Plus, they sort of shined a bit. And they didn't always stay circular. It was creepy as all hell, let me tell you. Especially because his eyelids didn't grow. So he couldn't even properly close his eyes.
Oh, damn it. Yeah, so in the event that the Psyker starts, having issues, the Commissar is there to assist the Psyker in making sure those issues don't get any worse. Usually this comes in the form of a slug.
Creepiness aside, though, the eye thing was amazingly unpleasant for Fumbles. For one thing, they didn't fit in his head properly, and there were all sorts of painful pressure building up.
Yay.
Then there was how sensitive they were. Anything but the dimmest light blinded the poor guy, and he couldn't even see that well in the dark since the skull pressure thing kept him from focusing.
Ugh.
He wound up hiding away in one of the private treatment rooms, with all the lights off and the windows shut, radiating misery. It was all we could do to take turns trying to make him feel better, and matters were not helped by the way the Hospitalier initially reacted to the situation.
Oh boy.
I mean, Doc's girlfriend didn't go all purge the unclean, but after it became obvious what sort of shit was going on, she began studiously ignoring Fumbles. That was especially rough on the little guy.
Poor guy.
You know, being a telepath and all.
Bathroom Guardians asks, have I seen the Milky Way sweep short is 30 seconds, and he thinks I'd love it? No, I haven't seen that. I need to start watching more of the shorts that have been requested, but I just, there's 100 and nearly 20 requests for reaction right now, and the shorts page is honestly, at this point, the movie Interstellar, every single time I start scrolling up on that thing, I hear the theme of that movie playing while I'm doing it, and I feel like I've achieved transcendence.
Luckily, Doc stepped in, and he got some help from our old diplomat adept, too. They sat down with her, and a few hours later she came into Fumble's room, muttering to herself about it being just another wound suffered in the Emperor's service.
Right.
Nubby and Twitch were initially distrustful of the change of heart, but she let the more hygienic of the pair stay to observe. And some medically approved skull cracking and eyelid stretching later, Fumbles was feeling much better. Anyway, we all hung out in the medbay while Sarge had his incredibly long meeting, and had a quiet sort of post-mission celebration. This primarily consisted of hanging out in Fumble's darkened room, a little drinking, and the sort of idle bullshitting that all guardsmen revel in. Twitch sat next to Fumbles and gave him a blow-by-blow of our mission, with a lot of commentary about what was really going on added in. Fumbles mostly just nodded and played with the pair of welding goggles Nubby had acquired for him from somewhere. They were going to need some resizing before he could wear them, but after that he'd be able to leave the room, and wouldn't look any weirder than the rest of us. Doc, who was on break from Gravis watching, and Amy speculated on what Sergeant Rebus and his scouts were doing to pass the time. Doc's ideas were all about hibernation and other boring medical stuff, and Amy mocked him for his lack of imagination. Her suggestions were definitely more imaginative, bordering on heretical even, and Doc hastily changed the subject. Unfortunately, he did this by congratulating her on going a whole mission without a facial burn, and on the regrowth of her hair. He managed to duck the bottle she threw at him, though. Nubby and Tink started talking about the various ways we'd come out ahead on the mission. By their reckoning, we were up by a few grav chutes, a power sword, a bolter, and a whole collection of Space Marine toys. Not to mention the moderately damaged stealth shuttle that was still waiting for us to get around to repairing it. Tink was beginning to speculate on whether Gravis really needed the bottom half of his power armor, and what he could make out of it if he had the time.
Oh my God, Tink,
when Sarge finally returned from his planning session. After automatically flipping the lights on, blinding Fumbles, then hastily turning them back off, Sarge grabbed a seat and told Tink to stop contemplating tech heresy. All of us watched him as he grabbed a bottle, leaned back and eyed Tink a little more. In a sort of idle way, Sarge asked us a purely hypothetical question. If Jim had been in a meeting with him, old Bill and Hannah were busy keeping the ship running, and Tink was here, then who was down in the cells keeping everything running and watching the zoanthrope?
Oh, come on.
The only answer he could think of was Theo, which couldn't possibly be right. It'd be colossally idiotic to leave one of our Xenos prisoners, alone and unsupervised, in charge of keeping the other Xenos prisoner from escaping and killing us all. Surely there must be some other explanation. One he was just too dumb to think of, right? Tink pondered that for a second, then scrambled for the door. Sarge wearily laughed and told them to sit back down. Once Tink was seated, Sarge looked at us and gave us the lowdown. As we knew, the psyker holding cells were falling apart. The zoanthrope was doing bad things every time the stasis field flickered. Sergeant Gravis was at death's door, and our ship's astropath had suffered a severe case of exploding head. We had no choice but to get back into the warp, but we were going to head for the nearest civilized Imperial world first. From there, we could order some replacement parts, get a new astropath, call for the Marines pickup, and hand Gravis over to someone with serious medical facilities. It was going to be rough, and we'd have to stand constant guard against warp shenanigans, but luckily it would only take a week. Just 1 week of frantic jury-rigging, dealing with whatever the zoanthrope and the warp could throw at us, and keeping Gravis from melting. And it would all be over. Honestly, looking back, I have no idea why any of us believed it was going to be that easy.
Why would you believe it would be that easy? Why? Oh, come on, Death. It can always get worse. You know this. It can always get worse. It's going to get worse. It's the way it is. And that was Tyranid acquisition experts. Guys, it can always get worse, and it's going to, and I already know it's going to. They haven't even gotten the damn thing off the ship yet. So, tomorrow, we're going to watch D-Warp, and let me actually look at this. Let me look real quick. And I'll just hit this right here so I can take a look at the next few episodes. So, this one is D-Warp, and then we have the Tyranid transportation experts part of the whole thing. Let's see. How long is this? It's going to be okay. So we'll watch D-Warp and Tyranid Acquisition Experts 1 and 2. Not acquisition, transportation. I have to figure out what we can do. I will. 1 second. I'm getting back up my chat. There we go. Do pariahs affect Tyranid psychers? I don't know, but I really don't. We haven't seen them put into two different places at the same time. Not yet, at least. I don't think. I don't even know if pariahs are still a thing. I really don't. Phalia says they could pick up an enslaver. That would make things worse. Well, not the current enslavers because they're kind of... No, they're kind of neutered compared to actual enslavers, but yeah. Lotus says, considering that they're the only ones dumb enough to try transport, yes. Hold the line, Space Marine. Guardsmen do it all the time. What are your plans for A Fan with Too Much Time's video? Did you know he uploaded... Everyone nuke Reich. X in chat to nuke Reich. Yes, I know he uploaded. Let me actually take a look at the upload date for that, because let me see. Star Wars versus 40K. Let me see when that went live. I don't do something the first day it's released. Let's see. Okay, so it is going to... His premiere for episode 36 is going to be on August the 8th. So I will set up a live stream. If nothing happens, I'll set it up on August the 9th. And we'll check it out then. I am... Oh, God, why? Why are you guys doing this to me? No. I'm going to be checking out the... I'm going to be checking out the A Fan with Too Much Time's episode 36 for Star Wars vs. 40K on Tuesday, the day after he uploads. I make it a point not to check out anything on the day that it's uploaded. It's just a thing for me, and hopefully we'll be able to get a fan in chat with us this time again, because it's always fun to have him in there. What is this? Yeah, nuke Warden. Just nuke him. Alright, so this series continues to deliver the entire time. It continues to deliver. Ronnie says the more you tell him A Fan with Too Much Time uploaded, he'll just keep pushing it back. This continues to deliver, guys. And thank you guys for coming and joining me for this, because this, I started doing live streams because it got to be fun. Like, all the memes, all the kind of stuff like that that's been put together for the channel because of this is immensely fun. In any case, though, yeah, I'll be live streaming again tomorrow. If you guys do not know, the 5-ish minute lore for Marnius Calgar is done. And I'm going to be premiering that at some point this week. And I am going to be finishing the editing for A Commissar Story Part 3 at some point this week. So, a lot of stuff. I'm getting a lot of stuff done. It's great. Yeah, Bloody Mag. I put something out in the community as well. for some reason, YouTube and Discord are being a pain right now. I'll put together the live stream notification later tonight, and I will nuke Nick Fulton at some point because Yes, Nick, thank you. I know that Fan uploaded. I appreciate you telling me, Fan. I appreciate you telling me that Fan has uploaded. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Nuke Nick, please. Oh my god, but so Bloody Magpie, just so you know, if just check if you're wondering if I'm going to be live streaming during the weekend, unless something happens, I'm gonna try to live stream on Saturdays and Sundays, sometime around the noonish. So just check into the channel and you'll see upcoming live streams. Also check in the general chat of the Discord because I'll normally put things there as well. In any case, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys have a great day. And yeah, the Emperor protects. Now I'm going to press buttons. I'm going to press buttons on this refurbished thing. Oh my god. Smoky black wings. What? Recaf is a thin string that holds the Imperium together. I can't even talk right. I gotta go. I'll talk to you guys next time.